The man I loved became a stranger in my pristine kitchen, his face contorted by fury as he demanded I pay his mother's $70,000 debt. That night, I learned some debts aren't just financial, they cost you your entire future. The sound of his voice, raw and ragged, bounced off our pristine kitchen tiles. "Why won't you pay for my mom?" Mark yelled, his face contorted in a way I'd never seen before. It was a mask of disbelief and fury, directed entirely at me. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists on the cool quartz countertop, the same countertop we'd picked out together 6 months ago, laughing about what our future would look like in this house. Now that future felt like it was dissolving into smoke right in front of me. Between us, on that perfect shimmering surface, lay a stack of papers. They were a monument to decades of financial irresponsibility, culminating in a single, horrifying number: $73,421 in utility debt. When I first met Mark, his mother, Carol, was just a quirky anecdote. He'd tell me stories of her free-spirit nature, how she'd once decided to live off-grid for a summer in a yurt she bought on a whim, or how she believed currency was a tool of the establishment and preferred to barter for things. It sounded charmingly eccentric from a distance, harmless. When I finally met her, she was all smiles and flowing skirts, calling me sweetheart and complimenting my grounded energy. She was the kind of woman who burned incense that smelled like dirt and talked about auras. I thought, okay, she's a bit out there, but her heart seems to be in the right place. Mark adored her, and for that reason, I tried my best to like her too. The first red flag was small. A few months into our relationship, Mark asked if I could lend his mom $100 for a holistic healing workshop. He promised she'd pay it back. She never did. A few months after that, it was $300 for a new set of supposedly magical crystals to realign the energy in her house. That wasn't paid back either. Each time, Mark would look so apologetic, so embarrassed. "She's just not good with money, babe," he'd say. "Her head is in the clouds." I let it go. I was making good money in my tech job, and a few $100s here and there wasn't going to break me. I did it for Mark. When we decided to move in together, I was the one who could afford the down payment on our house. I worked my tail off since I was 16, put myself through college, and landed a job that valued my skills. I was proud of what I had built. Mark was a graphic designer, passionate and talented, but his freelance work was inconsistent. He was saving what he could, and I never held his lower income against him. We were a team, or so I thought. The deal was simple. I'd cover the mortgage, and he'd handle the utilities and groceries. It was a system that worked. The problem, I slowly realized, was that Mark saw my financial stability not as something we shared for our future, but as a safety net for his mother. The requests for money became more frequent, the amounts larger. And then came the day, about a week ago, when he sat me down at this very kitchen island, his face pale and his hands shaking. He explained that his mom's house was in foreclosure. That was the opening salvo. The real bombshell was that, in the process, the utility companies had finally caught up with her. It turned out she hadn't paid her water, gas, or electric bills consistently for over 15 years. She'd ignore the notices, move them from one company to another when they threatened to shut her off, and somehow, through a combination of sweet-talking, sob stories, and sheer neglect, she'd let it balloon into this monstrous, unthinkable sum, $70,000. I was stunned into silence. I offered practical solutions, bankruptcy, contacting the utility companies to negotiate a payment plan, selling some of her vast collection of, well, junk that she called eclectic antiques. Every suggestion was shot down. "She can't declare bankruptcy, it would ruin her credit," he'd argue, oblivious to the irony. "They won't negotiate. They want it all now," he insisted, even though he hadn't even tried to call them. It became clear what he and she expected. They expected me to just write a check, which brings us to tonight. I spent the last week researching, even talking to a financial advisor friend of mine. I laid out a clear, multi-step plan for how Carol could begin to tackle this. It was difficult. It would require sacrifice on her part, but it was possible. When I presented it to Mark, he stared at the papers as if I'd handed him a dead animal. He didn't even read it. He just looked up at me, his eyes full of a chilling sense of entitlement. "This is a joke," he'd said, his voice dangerously low. "You can fix this with a bank transfer. It would take you 5 minutes." I stood my ground. "Mark, this isn't my debt. I love you, but I will not set myself on fire to keep your mother warm. She needs to face the consequences of her own actions." That's when the screaming started. He accused me of being heartless, of valuing money over family. He threw my success in my face, twisting my hard work into a character flaw. "It must be nice," he spat, "sitting up in your ivory tower judging people like my mom who haven't had it as easy as you." The injustice of it all stole my breath. I paid for this ivory tower with sleepless nights, with years of dedication, with sacrifices he couldn't even imagine. And now he was using it as a weapon against me. "So that's it?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You're just going to let her become homeless?" I stood firm, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No, Mark, she did this to herself." He slammed his fist on the counter again, making the stack of bills jump. He was breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for a new line of attack. His gaze landed on his phone, which buzzed on the countertop. It was a text from Mom. His whole demeanor shifted. The desperate anger drained away, replaced by something colder, more calculated. He looked up from the phone, and the man I loved was gone. In his place was a stranger with eyes like chips of ice. "She said you'd do this," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "She told me you were selfish. She also told me what to do if you said no." A chill, completely separate from the cool air conditioning, snaked its way up my spine. "What are you talking about, Mark? What did she tell you to do?" My voice was barely a whisper. The man I knew, the one who'd bring me coffee in bed and trace patterns on my back until I fell asleep, was gone. This man was a puppet, and I could suddenly, sickeningly feel the pull of his mother's strings. He gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "She knew you wouldn't understand. She said people like you, who have always had money, you can't comprehend what real desperation is. You see it as a moral failing." He pushed himself off the counter and began to pace, his movements jerky and agitated. "She said your love was conditional, that as long as I played by your rules, in your house, everything would be fine. But the second I needed you, the second family needed you, you'd show your true colors." My head was spinning. My true colors? Mark, I offered to help. I gave you a realistic plan to get her out of this mess. He stopped pacing and whirled around to face me, his finger jabbing in my direction. "A plan? You gave her a life sentence of debt management and misery. You have the power to make this go away with a click of a button, and you chose to lecture her instead. That's not help, that's judgment." He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest as if steeling himself for what he was about to say next. "So, yeah, she told me what to do. If you weren't willing to be my partner in this, then I have to treat you like what you are, a business arrangement." I felt a wave of nausea. A business arrangement. We live together. We're building a life together. He smiled, but it was a terrifying, hollow thing. "Are we? Or am I just living in your house? See, I've been paying the utilities. I've been buying the groceries. I've been contributing to the upkeep of this property. My lawyer will see that as an investment." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. My lawyer. It was a declaration of war. My mind reeled, trying to process the sheer audacity. An investment? Mark, you paid the light bill. I put $150,000 down on this house. I pay the mortgage and the property taxes every single month. That's not an investment. That's what you agreed to as your share of our living expenses. He just shook his head, a smug, pitying look on his face. That's not how Carol's friend sees it. He's a lawyer. He says I have a claim, that our relationship constitutes a domestic partnership, and the assets we've accumulated while together should be split. My jaw literally dropped. The audacity was breathtaking. He was threatening to sue me for a piece of my house to pay off his mother's debt, a debt she accumulated long before I was ever in the picture. This is insane, I breathed, the reality of the betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. This isn't you. This is her. This is her voice coming out of your mouth. His face hardened. You know what? You're right. This isn't me. The old me was weak. The old me let you walk all over him because he was so grateful that someone so successful would even look at him. He took a step closer, and now he was weaponizing our most intimate conversations against me. You told me about your dad, how he lost everything, how you swore you'd never, ever be in that position. You've been so scared of losing your precious security that you've become just like him in the end, cold, selfish, and alone. He might as well have slapped me. He knew how deep that wound was, and he'd just poured salt all over it. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. "Get out of my house. Now." He didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of someone who had just played a winning card. "No, I don't think I will," he said calmly. "You see, according to Carol's friend, that's the second part of the plan. If you try to throw me out, it'll be seen as an illegal eviction. This is my residence, too." He held my gaze, his eyes full of a triumphant malice I never could have imagined. "You're not going to solve this by yelling, babe. You're not the one in control anymore." He then pulled his phone back out, his thumb hovering over the screen. "You clearly won't listen to me. I guess it's time to bring in the person you've wronged." My blood turned to ice. Before I could even ask what he meant, he was pressing the phone to his ear. "Hey, Mom, it's time. She's not cooperating. You need to come over now. And pack a bag. It looks like you're going to be staying with us for a while." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Staying with us?" I echoed, my voice a strangled squeak. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it sent a jolt of ice through my veins that quickly boiled into incandescent rage. "Absolutely not. She is not setting one foot in this house, Mark. I am calling the police." I reached for my own phone, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped it. But Mark was faster. He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and clamped his hand over mine, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't," he warned, his voice a low growl. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be. You call the cops and I tell them you assaulted me. Who do you think they'll believe when they see the scene here? A hysterical woman and a calm, rational man?" He gestured around the pristine kitchen, the very picture of domestic tranquility, now the stage for this insane drama. I yanked my hand away, disgusted. "You wouldn't?" He just stared at me, his expression cold and unyielding. The man I loved, the one I thought I knew, was well and truly gone. He had been replaced by this monstrous caricature, programmed by his manipulative mother. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a chilling sense of dread. He was right. It would be my word against his. And in that moment, he looked far more believable than I felt. I sank onto one of the bar stools, my legs suddenly unable to support me. He was playing a game I didn't even know existed, and he was 3 moves ahead. Less than 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Mark practically ran to answer it, flinging the door open with a flourish. And there she was, Carol. She stood on my doorstep, a worn floral suitcase in one hand and a large, overflowing tote bag in the other. She wasn't dressed in her usual flowing, bohemian garb. Tonight she looked small. She wore a simple, faded cardigan over a gray t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back messily, and her face was pale and tear-streaked. It was a masterful performance. She looked like a refugee, a poor, helpless victim of a cruel world, and I, apparently, was the cruel world. "Oh, Marky," she whimpered, dropping her bags and throwing her arms around him. I was so worried. She sounded so angry on the phone. She shot a look at me over his shoulder, her eyes full of a mixture of fear and accusation. It was so perfectly executed that for a split second, I almost doubted myself. Was I the villain here? Then I remembered the $70,000 debt and the calculated legal threats, and my resolve hardened like steel. Mark ushered her inside, clucking over her like a mother hen. "It's okay, Mom. You're safe now. We'll figure this out." Carol shuffled into the kitchen, avoiding my gaze. She looked around the room, my house, bought with my money, with a wide-eyed, pitiable expression. "Oh, it's just lovely, sweetheart," she said to me, her voice trembling slightly. "You have such wonderful taste." The compliment felt like a slap. She was acting as if she were a guest, an invited one, instead of an invader who had just orchestrated the demolition of my life. "Don't call me sweetheart," I said, my voice dangerously level. "And you are not safe here. You are not welcome here. This is not happening." Carol's face crumpled, and she let out a theatrical sob, burying her face in Mark's chest. "See?" she cried, her voice muffled. "She hates me. I knew she did." Mark glared at me over the top of her head. "Look what you're doing to her. She's about to be homeless, and you're treating her like a criminal." "She is the reason for this," I practically screamed, finally losing my composure. "She is a con artist who has spent her entire life avoiding responsibility, and now she's roped you into her scheme to fleece me. Open your eyes, Mark." But he wasn't listening. He was too busy stroking his mother's hair, murmuring soothing words to her. It was a scene of pure manipulation, and I was the unwilling audience. Carol eventually calmed down, wiping her fake tears on the sleeve of her cardigan. She looked at me with a newfound bravery, her chin held high. "I know you think I'm a bad person," she began, her voice taking on a sanctimonious tone. "But money isn't the most important thing in the world. Family is. Love is. I raised my son to know that. I'm sorry you were raised differently." The sheer nerve of it left me speechless. She was lecturing me on family values after setting her son on me like an attack dog to extort money. The rest of the evening was a surreal nightmare. Mark announced that his mother would be taking the guest room. He went upstairs and started clearing out my home office supplies to make space for her things. Carol, meanwhile, made herself at home in my kitchen. She started opening my cabinets, peering into my fridge, clucking her tongue at my processed foods. She asked where I kept the organic chamomile tea. It felt like an invasion, a strategic occupation of my personal space. I just sat at the kitchen island, paralyzed by shock and fury, watching these two strangers dismantle my home, my life, my sense of security, piece by piece. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the door to my bedroom opened. It was Mark. He stood silhouetted in the hallway light. I didn't say a word. I just waited. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, not touching me. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tired. "She's really scared, you know. They're going to auction off the house next week. Everything she owns will be gone." I remained silent. There was nothing I could say. "I know this is a lot," he continued, "but it doesn't have to be this way. We can still fix this. We can go back to how things were." Hope, that stupid, treacherous thing, flickered in my chest. Maybe this was him, the real him, fighting his way through his mother's influence. "How?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He turned to look at me, and in the dim light, I could see his expression. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't apologetic. It was expectant. "Just pay it," he said simply, as if we hadn't already had this conversation 1,000 times. "Pay the 70 grand. My mom said she'll even sign a piece of paper, an IOU. She'll pay you back, someday." The flicker of hope died instantly. He still didn't get it. Or he did, and he just didn't care. No, Mark. My voice was flat, final. He sighed, a long, weary sound of disappointment. I was afraid you'd say that. He stood up from the bed and walked over to my dresser. My heart started to pound. He picked up my car keys and my wallet, which I'd left there earlier. He turned back to me, dangling the keys from his finger. Well, if you're not going to help us, we have to help ourselves, he said, his voice taking on that same chillingly calm tone from before. My mom can't stay here forever. It's clearly upsetting you. So we found a solution, and we're going to need your car. I sat bolt upright in bed, a cold dread washing over me. What are you talking about? What solution? Where are you going with my car? He just jingled the keys, the metallic sound echoing the frantic pounding in my chest. Don't worry about it. It's better if you don't know. Plausible deniability and all that. He opened my wallet and pulled out my primary credit card. We'll need this too, just for gas and some supplies. We'll be back in a few days. A few days? He was taking my car and my credit card for a few days, with his grifter mother in tow, and expected me to just sit here? The fog of shock and paralysis finally lifted, replaced by a crystalline, cold fury. This was my home, my life. They would not take another thing from me. Put them back, Mark, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up, facing him. For the first time all night, he looked a little uncertain. He had expected me to yell, to cry, to be the hysterical woman he'd accused me of being. He didn't expect this icy resolve. Put my keys and my wallet back on the dresser, now. He hesitated, then a familiar smirk crept onto his face. Or what? You'll call the cops? We've been over this. He was trying to regain control, to push me back into the role of the victim. It wasn't going to work, not anymore. No, Mark, I'm not going to call the cops, I said, taking a slow step towards him. I'm going to call my bank. I'm going to report that card stolen, and then I'm going to call my insurance company and report my car stolen. And when they ask who took it, I'm going to give them your name. And your mother's. His smirk vanished. The reality of what I was saying, the actual legal consequences, finally seemed to penetrate the thick fog of his mother's influence. His face paled. You wouldn't. They're my family. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You stopped being my family the moment you threatened to sue me for this house, the moment you brought that woman over my threshold. You made this a business arrangement, remember? Well, business is over. I held out my hand, the keys, the wallet, now. He stared at my outstretched hand, then back at my face. He saw no weakness there, no room for negotiation. The fight was over, and he had lost. Defeated, he placed the keys and wallet into my palm. The cool metal and worn leather felt like a victory. Good, I said, my voice clipped. Now, you have 10 minutes. Both of you. Pack your things and get out of my house. If you are not gone by the time I count to 600, I will not hesitate to call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Carol must have been listening from the guest room because she appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of outrage. You can't do this. This is an illegal eviction. We have rights, she shrieked. This time, I didn't let her get to me. I just smiled, a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. Actually, I can, I said, turning to face her directly. You are not a tenant. You have no lease, you have paid no rent, and you have established no residency. You are an uninvited guest who is now being asked to leave. And Mark, I turned back to him, our verbal agreement about utilities did not constitute a domestic partnership with claims to my assets. I know this, because while you and your mother were plotting in my kitchen, I wasn't just sitting here feeling sorry for myself. I was on the phone with my actual lawyer, the one I pay for with my own money. The color drained from both of their faces. They had so thoroughly underestimated me. They saw me as a walking ATM, a soft-hearted pushover they could bully and manipulate. They never imagined I would fight back with their own weapons. Only mine were real. Carol started sputtering, trying to regain the upper hand, but her arguments were weak and desperate. Mark just stood there, looking utterly broken, like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. He looked from his mother's frantic face to my stone-cold one and seemed to finally realize the monumental, life-altering mistake he had made. True to my word, I started counting aloud. At the 10-minute mark, I had my phone in hand, my thumb hovering over the call button for the local police department. They scrambled. They threw their meager belongings back into their bags and practically fell over each other getting out the front door. Mark paused on the porch, his hand on the doorknob. He turned back, his eyes pleading. "Can't we just talk about this?" he asked, his voice cracking. The old me, the me from 12 hours ago, would have caved, but that woman was gone. "There's nothing left to talk about, Mark," I said, and I closed the door in his face, sliding the deadbolt home with a satisfying thud. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. I spent the next day changing the locks and installing a security system. I blocked both of their numbers. A week later, a letter arrived from a law firm, a weak attempt to claim some sort of financial settlement. My lawyer dealt with it in a single scathing email. I never heard from them again. A few months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Carol's house had indeed been sold at auction, and she'd moved into a tiny, run-down apartment. Mark had moved in with her. The image of the two of them, co-conspirators stewing in the consequences of their own greed and laziness, brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. It took time to heal from the betrayal, but with every passing day, the memory of Mark's rage and his mother's insidious whispers faded. I had worked hard to build my life, to create a sanctuary for myself, and I learned that night that the most important utility I'd ever have to pay for was my own peace of mind, and it was a debt I would never let anyone else touch again.